Hi, friends. Logan and Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, we are talking all about event rehearsals and event tech checks and why they are essential for your success at your event. We break down exactly what is a rehearsal and what's the difference between that and a tech check, who needs to be involved, things you need to consider. Can it actually help you from things going awry at your event? And just doing some of the do's and don'ts that we've experienced with clients and different events and how they've approached event rehearsals. You are going to learn a lot. This is one of my favorite episodes that we've done recently. I feel like I say that about many of them, but this one is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So, hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events Podcast. We are thrilled to be with you today, and we are going to get into our episode about why event rehearsals are essential. We have some strong opinions about this one, so we're going to bring the heat in this episode. But before we get into it, Logan, we have our conversation starter for today. So I'm actually particularly excited for you to answer this. What's the most unusual item you have in your house?
I want to know what you think I should answer, but I do you want me just to first figure out what I think the most unusual thing is in our house?
I do.
Oh, my partner really likes art. So we have a lot of very random antiques and art in our apartment. One that just got called out to me though by my friends is because he's a landscape architect, he's building these amazing, beautiful gardens near Mount Rainier, and he bought these griffins, which are what are they? Mythological creatures that, kind of sit, and they're meant to be, you'd see them on like cornerstones of either fences, walls, that kind of stuff. He bought these two that are probably like 2.5 feet tall, pretty big. And they've been sitting on our balcony for the last 2 years because they will eventually make their way to these gardens. But right now we just look like we have a very dramatic balcony of these two griffins sitting on the corners of our balcony, staring out over our neighborhood.
I didn't have a particular item in mind for you, but I know you have a lot of like really cool, interesting things from other places in your apartment. So those ones are awesome too, and I'm glad you said it. I just Googled what a griffin was. Like I've heard of it before and I know what it is, but yesterday I ironically Googled what's a griffin. So,
Small
meant
world.
to be small world. For me, I have it's in this room next to me, so I'm over here like, should I show you all? But I'll just let you imagine it. We have an extra room that we kind of just like collect a lot of storage and like random stuff. There's like a file cabinet in there, but on 2 of the 4 walls is basically a shrine to my husband's skimboarding career. And so it's just like giant posters. Like one of the posters is probably like 5 feet. Like it's a huge poster. There's the skimboards on the wall. He skimboards. There's like medals and stuff, and there's just like a ton of posters and pictures of him. It's really funny, and like no one expects it, but when we have guests come, we're like, yeah, this looks a little obsessive. But what do you do with stuff like that? Where do you put it? So we dedicated a room to all that random stuff, and it looks like a shrine to him. So there you go.
That's so funny. I was just discussing, I'm getting a lot of sports stuff from all the work I'm doing, and that I'm like, I'm going to run out of wall space. I to poster from the softball event that I did that I'm like, it is going to fill up eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
I love that. You have a shrine to some skimboarding. Well, before we jump into this week's topic, we do want to plug our Better Events community that we launched just a couple months ago. We already have 3 bonus episodes that you get access to as a part of our paid community. We have an active Discord channel where we're all sharing our different hot takes, tips, opportunities. We're manifesting some big goals for some of our community members. And then you also get access to some live quarterly meetups that Mary and I are at, and all of our community members who want to attend. And our first one that we did all the way back in June was just it was really magical. I enjoyed it a lot. I know Mary and I both had some warm, fuzzy feelings, and it was just fun to get to bond with our fellow community members. So I feel like we're on to something special. If you haven't made the leap yet, we have a monthly fee, or you can just pay once a year. It's $75. I would honestly say you'll get that value out of it in the first couple of months, plus some bonus content. So get on over to our Substack or our link in our show notes to join us. But yes, a little bit more about why we chose this topic. As Mary mentioned, this is event rehearsals, tech checks, whatever you want to call it. We will dive into it more. They're essential is how we entitled this episode, but honestly, they are like crucial for the success of your event. And so this is something that Mary and I have both experienced, I would say recently, as well as throughout our careers, both clients choosing to do rehearsals and the ones that don't. So we're going to share some of that experience. We might be getting a little bit on our soapbox, but listeners, this is going to be a fun episode. I'm excited, Mary. But start broad, like we always do. Mary, can you first say what we mean by rehearsal and what type of event components do you need to execute a rehearsal?
Yeah, similar to theater or whatever, like dance and things like that, they do rehearsals for. It's the same thing. You are rehearsing some program component, typically, right, of your event, and you're practicing and making sure the people know what they're doing, the team knows what they're doing, and everyone knows their roles and responsibilities. So, there's probably like way more ways you could define that. I didn't Google this one. This one's coming from the heart.
Yeah, Mary, I feel like I agree with you for how you define a rehearsal. I think it is something that, yes, the pieces would be you need everyone who's involved in making your event actually happen. I feel like they usually are more common for your programmatic pieces. So anything that's happening on a stage or in a breakout room, those pieces you need to rehearse. I don't think you necessarily rehearse like setting up the floral arrangements, though you could probably argue that you as the florist should probably practice that. But as a general like event planner, event organizer, you need to rehearse your program, whatever that looks like. And I will use the terms interchangeably, both rehearsal and tech check. And why am I going to say them interchangeably? Because I found during COVID, I would do virtual events and I would say the word rehearsal and I'd get some pushback from speakers who were like, I don't have to rehearse. I speak all the time. Why do you need me to be there? And so I started reframing it as a tech check to show that we needed them to come so we could tech their audio, make sure their video looked good, their internet was good. Virtual gave us a lot less control. I have since carried over that language into in-person too. And I will be fluid with the client of, do they want us to call it a rehearsal? We can call it a rehearsal. Do they want to just call it a tech check? Because just like virtual, my speaker needs to come in person. I want to mic them up, make sure they're comfortable. They know how they're coming on the stage, how they're coming off the stage. They don't have to say their exact entire speech, but just we know their clicker works. Like any elements that you're doing, you need to rehearse them or tech check them. And I think we're starting here, Mary, very broad about what a rehearsal is. You can broadly just have one, but I would say the more technical and complicated your show, you're probably going to need multiple. I think almost every event that I have the control in this, I do 2 rehearsals, one internal with me and my tech team and my production team, and one that was with speakers, client facing, that kind of stuff. And I jumped the gun to our second question, Mary. So
Well, I think what you just touched on though is like really a critical element that I wanted to call out is like you just mentioned like a tech rehearsal and then like a client rehearsal or whatever you called it. But when talent or speakers are there, like they also call it a sound check, like a mic check, like just come and test it and make sure we're good and like everything's good. Yeah, you're right. A lot of times they're more receptive to that. But Logan, can you explain the difference between like a tech rehearsal and an actual rehearsal? Because this is something that I think is key.
yeah, how I always say the difference is that the event or anything I'm doing that's speaker facing or client facing, I want it to be the most polished of what I have so far. So to me, a tech rehearsal with your production team or your AV team, that is like your rough, your dry run, your practice. This is where we can start and stop and talk through anything that people are confused on. We can make sure everybody's on the same page. When I say slides on screen, what does that look like? So that's kind of your rough first draft, so that you are really truly in a polished, almost final version by the time that you have speakers in front of you. And a lot of times that comes from, I deal with a lot of like speakers who are VIPs are very important people, have busy schedules, and I don't want them standing there while we're making sure, like, I guess a good example here would be in my tech check, we would run in my technical rehearsal, we would test all the microphones. And we would have somebody actually walk on stage talking into the mic. Mary's done this with me on some events I've worked for her. I've asked her to go up there and just talk into the mic. And that's because we want to make sure we're not hearing feedback. We want to make sure everything's plugged into the right place, because that tech rehearsal is the time, if something doesn't sound right, we have all the time in the world to fix it, make sure it's correct, so that when the speaker's there in the actual rehearsal or dress rehearsal or their mic check, whatever it is, we're just testing it on them to make sure, oh, they're really tall. Okay, this microphone, the lapel mic needs to be higher up, or maybe they want a handheld. And it's just coaching them then on how to hold the microphone, not necessarily having them stand there while we have to troubleshoot a tech issue, because I don't want to waste their time. They don't want to waste my time. And so that's how I always view the tech rehearsal as an internal thing, production team. We're going to roughly get through everything. And then anything for the speaker rehearsal is a little bit more speaker focused of what do they want to work on? Are they comfortable? Do they want to run through anything? But we've already done all that on our own.
Yeah, so I think you've naturally identified like who is participating in each kind of rehearsal. But what about like the client or the in-house planner, like those people, or honestly, it feels like it's whoever actually has an investment in the program, like whoever was kind of supporting the programmatic piece before they even got on site. But when do they come in and which ones do they attend?
Yeah, so I'm definitely talking about this all from like a producer perspective, meaning you usually are hiring me as Logan to come in and I work with you, client event organizer, and I'm your middle person between event organizer and the production team, the AV team, your encore in-house team, your external vendor. And so I would say I'm your advocate, so I can run these tech rehearsals on my own, and then you're going to be in a client-specific rehearsal, or the speaker rehearsal. It really depends on the size of the event. I've had some events where I do a tech rehearsal, then we do a client rehearsal. So like the organizers sitting in to be like, yes, those slides look good. I like the lighting. There's certain calls they have to make. And then there's a speaker rehearsal. So that's 3 already that we're talking about. If you, though, don't have a producer and you are an organization that is hosting an event, you're in-house and you're working with an AV vendor, you probably, if they push back on doing a rehearsal with you, that's a big red flag. Because I will say sometimes some of these organizations, they won't rehearse on their own unless you're working. That's why you work with production agencies and bigger companies. They have a certain standard that they will do things. So they'll do their own rehearsal. But I would always insist on a rehearsal. If I was hosting an event, I always would want to rehearse and I'd want to be present for that rehearsal. And then I'd also want to make sure we did tech checks or mic checks with our speakers. That's what I would do if I were in the shoes of the person paying for this event. Does that answer your question, Mary?
Yeah, I think that it really does. Cause well, one of the questions that I had was like, do folks that are part like we're assuming that a lot of the folks who are listening to this podcast are involved in events in some way. Maybe you're in-house, maybe you're external, like whatever it is that you do. But there are also folks involved in an event that really like are not event professionals, but they are involved in some way. It's their company's event and they get wrapped into it. So those folks, do you think this might be a hot take that they really understand the importance of rehearsals?
I don't. I mean, we're doing this episode because we have definitely had some experience where this has been an afterthought. A rehearsal has been a nice to have. And I guess we should have, when we're tackling it now, is that I want to make sure you have time for rehearsal in your on-site schedule or your event schedule if you're doing this virtually. You need to make sure you budget for that. I've come up on it a couple times where the client had only budgeted enough time to get things set up and loaded in, and then it was time for the event. And that's not saying you can't have an event. You definitely can. But the title of this episode gives it away that how essential rehearsals are. You never want to be the first time you're running through everything in order as it's supposed to be when it's at your event in front of people. There are so many like simple questions and things that come up, options you get for, do you want them to come on this way or that way? Or I talk about all the time, transitions are so important. No one talks about transitions in the planning process, and rehearsals are a great time to like have a moment with your speaker to say, hey, are you going to hand it back to the MC? Or are you going to say thank you and good night and walk off stage? And because you talk through them and you rehearse that, it looks like it's smooth. It's smooth like butter for your attendees. If you don't rehearse that, you're going to have weird, awkward pauses that your attendees are definitely going to notice. Like yeah, I think it's just one that people forget that it takes time to do these things. And the more complex your program, the more speakers you have, the more complicated it is. That means you need more rehearsals usually. Uh, it's just so important. And so to me, it's just, I don't think I do any events now that if I'm the program piece that I would say I wouldn't even, that I would be like, oh, we don't need rehearsal. Even my sporting events, we do rehearsals. We do rehearsals ourselves, like pretending to stand in for fans. I've even had some of my sporting events, we have 2 volunteer like youth teams come in and play each other so we can practice, the officials practice, the scorekeepers, like we all practice together because it is so many like moving parts and things that you're going to be like, if the first time we're doing all this together is in front of a live audience with a really important match happening, we all could, we could fail, and nobody wants to fail. Like that's what the rehearsal time is, the time to set you up for success.
Yeah, I would totally add like kind of a story that's fresh in my mind. Um, I was part of an event and I knew the rehearsal times and things like that, but I should say like I was just doing on-site support, so I was kind of picking up the pieces from what I perceive the needs to be. And the tech team had a rehearsal that was scheduled, which is awesome. But that was with speakers, and so I was talking to them, and I was like, "Can we do a tech rehearsal like an hour before then?" And they're like, "Well, we already have one scheduled for 4." I'm like, "You have a bunch of speakers coming at 4, so we need to do this at 3." And I will say, unfortunately, like I really have had to push most tech teams to do a rehearsal with me. It's never something that I think that they've really offered to me. I've always had to ask for it, which honestly like really frustrates me. I think that's like a huge problem, but it's happened almost like regardless of who the company is. So I don't know like what's going on there, but or maybe I'm too controlling. I don't know, but I'm like, I need you to give me this time. Also, because we had like slide updates and things like that I wanted to like talk through and make sure that they felt comfortable. So anyway, we made the time and we did the thing. Um, and that's when we had conversations about like, so are we doing like walk up music while we're waiting for people to come on? What does that look like? And it's just moments like this when I'm like, what if we hadn't talked through these things? Like, what would have happened? Who's making assumptions? And also, a lot of production companies are really talented, right? So you can assume that like they can come in and they're going to do these things anyway, but it's like I was posing questions that they hadn't even thought about before. And so those types of things just make me nervous. And they were a really talented production partner. And so I'm not discrediting them at all, but it proves the importance of having these conversations and really really walking through everything. So I think the tech rehearsal is like essential, and of course the speaker rehearsal is as well. But you could argue, Logan, I don't know, that if your tech is locked in, you can deal with a lot of stuff because people are a little unpredictable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have had some really big shows where we don't get access to all the speakers. So I guess that is a caveat to me, is like, of the 2, a tech internal, no speakers, just your team rehearsal is the most essential for setting you up for success. And then speaker rehearsals, the way I've phrased it and I've wordsmithed it with clients is I'm always like, the rehearsal is for the speaker. I want the speaker to look and sound as good as they do on the biggest stage in the world. And that rehearsal ensures that we know what they're expecting, they know what we're expecting, and everybody looks good. I've also had speakers though that don't have time, CEOs that fly in, get off their private jet, and literally walk on our stage, and they do great. They do it all the time though, but they also have people on their team who have already talked to us ahead of time and been very communicative to figure that out. Occasionally, too, I mean, keynote speakers, I'm sure anybody in the industry has had a horror story or two with a keynote speaker. Is usually external. You pay them, they fly in, they don't like to do rehearsals. I had one that like really wanted to jump off the stage and like joked about it in his tech check that we snuck in 5 minutes before doors. And I was like, haha, please don't do that. There's speakers and wires and all kinds of things you're going to hit. And that involved a little bit of our team having to be on the fly of like, does he want that slide up, or should we be on the live shot? I don't know. Is he going to advance his slide now? Like, these are questions that, to your point, Mary, like, yes, if your experienced tech person has good instincts, they can make up for hiding the fact that you didn't do a rehearsal, but you're really relying on that person to be really good. And we've seen something, I mean, we had Tony on the podcast just last week talking about saving money with AV. A frustration I've seen is a lot of folks retired or got out of the AV industry during COVID. And so you're dealing with operators and techs that aren't as experienced. or maybe just aren't the A team because the A team people got booked months ago and your event contracted 2 months before your event. You might not be getting the top people from that company. And so you don't want to make assumptions that this person knows exactly what's going on. And so it's helpful to have that tech rehearsal, that moment to say, there's no dumb questions. Let me know, like, yeah, let's figure out music. Okay, what walk-up music do you want? To make sure that they don't accidentally play a song with lyrics in it that don't fit your company values or have lyrics in it. It's copyright and you guys were streaming to YouTube. Like, there's just little things that you need to cover in those tech rehearsals that I think will help set you up for success. So I'm sorry, Mary, your story there that you were made to feel that way, because to me, that just feels like that's ignorance on the production partner side. I literally don't know anything I do that I don't have a internal rehearsal on to make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward. I feel like I've even rehearsed groups like me doing an event by myself. I've sat down with myself and like rehearsed it and stepped through it to make sure I know what buttons to hit and what to do.
Also, I was thinking like people like AV partners work with different people all of the time. So I wouldn't put it past them if they're like, sometimes somebody gives me this run of show that's not even a run of show. And they're like, we're just going to make it work. Like, we're going to work through it internally. And then you get somebody who's like an event professional who's like, no, I know the importance of this and I'm not going to come. I'm going to add value and I'm going to make your run of show probably like the client's run of show like a little bit better. I wouldn't blame them if they just like don't expect maybe more support. And so maybe they're not asking us because they don't know that we can help with it. But I've definitely like, I think we should get on our soapbox for a second at this time about the importance of a run of show, which we have talked about many a time, but this is applicable for rehearsals, right? Because it's only going to be so helpful if you don't have a run of show. And this is where I would also say for non-event folks, I don't think that they really understand the importance of a run of show, and they definitely don't build it out in a way that's truly helpful to a production partner either. So I've just like taken it upon myself now with almost any event to edit it. Like I started adding like slide cues and all this stuff in it that they never would. And it's almost easier for me just to do it because I've learned that people don't understand that that is actually what the production partner needs, not just this like basic show flow. So I don't know if you want to add to the soapbox, Logan.
I mean, I hear, and that's the other thing. I mean, I just said techs aren't experienced. There's also a lot of amazing techs and operators out there from a production perspective that have pulled off great events without a run of show. Like, I've met these people. They're like, oh, you have a run of show. I was like, no, I'm sorry. You've worked events that don't. And they're like, yes, there are clients that come in that don't have a run of show. Or to your point, Mary, like more of a timeline of like session starts, session ends. And like the production person's like, okay, where's all the middle stuff? And you can probably assume if, it's a smaller event, it's like, oh, it's slides and somebody's microphone. Cool. That's great. You could definitely ad lib that and figure it out in the moment. But to Mary's point, the fact that you're putting slide cues in, the more people that know what's going on from a behind the scenes perspective, the more successful and smooth your event's going to come off as, than you just kind of winging it. And, oh no, that you had videos in your presentation. Let me run a cable up to your laptop to plug it into the projector. And we're all sitting there and waiting while that happens. Versus in a tech check or a rehearsal, it's like, oh, I see your slides. They have video with audio. Okay, I'll make sure I have a line up there for you. So you just plug in. It's all preset. Like, we've already figured all of that stuff out. So yeah, I don't even know if I want to do a moment of silence for a good run of show, because it just terrifies me that people do events without a run of show. Mary, that's just like the scary part. I love my run of shows. They keep me honest. Though I have told clients that I need to make sure my run of show, it's not an aspirational run of show with timings and things. Like, it needs to encompass the real run times of how long we think things are going to take. And my run of show is only as valuable as the information I was given. So I've had a couple of times where I build a run of show, someone comes in 2 days before the event and completely changes the format, what we're doing, the order of things, and I have to redo all my work, which, again, as long as I'm capturing the final plan of what we're going to do before we're on site, I'm fine. I don't like doing busy work, but yes, a run and show is really important. And the more experience you get, the more you do it. And if you find yourself responsible for this programmatic piece that we're talking about, the more in depth you're going to need to go into run of shows and what needs to be, all included to set you up for success.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I think it helps that we're in agreement here, but hopefully others that are listening are as well. Okay, so Logan, I shared a couple things like moments or issues that come up when I've been like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we're doing this rehearsal. Do you have any specific examples or things like that when you felt that way?
One from my sporting world that was pretty funny was we did a rehearsal about how the athletes were going to enter the field of play. And this is like your starting lineups if you go to a game. It's like, all right, where are they coming in from? What entrance are they going to come through? How do we announce them? And as a part of that, we usually announce the referees or the umpires or whoever the officials are for the thing. In the past, outside of the sporting event, I usually get the actual officials to be there so that we can train them on where to go. They're like, oh, they're too busy. They can't be here. So we used volunteers. So our whole team, our camera people, we knew where they were coming from. We knew how they were coming in. But two crucial pieces were missing. My broadcast, the TV cameras were not there, so they didn't see it. And we didn't have the real officials. I thought our volunteers were people who would then talk to the officials. Bad assumptions, I guess, all the way around. Day one of competition comes. The officials come from a completely different area than what we rehearsed. We had our cameras trained on the right area, and what broadcast TV took was a third completely different area. So it was just this like chaotic moment that I had frustration going, why did we rehearse if we didn't rehearse with the real people? Because that rehearsal meant nothing. That's not where the officials came out. That person who was standing in for them didn't give me correct information. I didn't get access to the officials ahead of time to let them know where we wanted them to go. And so it was like a chaotic moment that didn't have to be chaotic. And that might have been, I think I did a bonus tip here on the podcast for it, was why it's so crucial to either have the actual speakers or the actual performers or the actual people do the rehearsal so that you're getting true and accurate information, or someone from their team who can accurately tell you what's going on, because then that rehearsal doesn't mean anything. It's not helpful if that's not actually what they're going to do.
Seems obvious when you say it that way, but yeah, sometimes you got to explain stuff like that for sure. Okay, so last question. Can mistakes in a program still occur even if you do rehearsals or tech checks?
Mary, this is I feel like it's an unfortunate answer, but the answer is yes. I shouldn't be surprising anybody here in the event industry because we know the best laid plans, still things can happen. But Mary knows my mantra, and I think I've said it here before. I always tell clients, I can't promise them a perfect event, but I can promise you have the right people in the right roles who are going to be able to react appropriately to anything that happens. And I will say, by doing a rehearsal and a tech check, you are mitigating what mistakes and things happen in a program because you've already talked through a lot of it. So when it truly is an issue or something, it's like a piece of machinery does malfunction. Like microphones will cut out. That just in life, it happens. You can tech check them. But in your rehearsal, you talked about maybe what happens to your speaker. If your mic goes out, don't worry, our A2, our other audio person is going to run a handheld mic out to you. And we talked about that in rehearsal. So when the mic goes out, because it could, you have somebody run out and it's not the speaker standing on stage confused trying to figure out what's happening. So there's no way to make nothing go, to avoid all mistakes and all things going wrong. But I think it just really helps set you up for success. Mary, what's your take on that?
Yeah, 100%. Of course, there's still going to be mistakes. Like there's so much that you can do to eliminate room for error, but we're still dealing with people and technology, and just as any event, something is going to go awry, at least most likely. We love it when it doesn't, but I agree with everything that's been said, and it seems obvious, but we have to point it out. You can do all you can to prepare, and it's essential, but something may still not go according to plan, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I even have in my inbox today an email for an event in 2025, people, for next year, where I've had to drill down and had some back and forth with the AV company about just how many hours are included for their technicians so that we have time. And I'm going to have to respond back again to ask, is that enough time to set up and have time to rehearse and then execute the event? And we're going to have to do it all on the same day, which I guess my pro tip here is my preference is always if you can rehearse the day before. That just saves less that you have to do on the event day, more space if you have to troubleshoot or reschedule something. But we know spaces get booked. Sometimes you only have access day of, and that just makes your team have to come in really early to accommodate those rehearsals. You definitely can do it, but I've just found the more complicated the events and the multi-day conferences, you will need literally entire rehearsal days just for rehearsing ahead of your show starting. And then smaller programs or shorter in time, a 1-hour gala program, you can rehearse that day of, but the more time you give yourself is just always better.
I think that we are good to go on to our bonus tip, which I have and actually is applicable to our conversation, which doesn't always happen, but here we go. I would say don't be entirely afraid if a speaker chooses to speak from the heart, but make sure that you do give them a time limit. For example, I was working an event and the speaker was like, I got this. And he did. He spoke at a lot of things. And his talk was so good, honestly, but it was rather lengthy also. So we knew from the beginning that he was going to speak from the heart. It worked for him. It was really impactful, but maybe we should have just confirmed that his time was shorter than he took. But don't be entirely afraid. Sometimes it works out. That's my bonus tip for today.
And just to add on to it, you can still ask that person to rehearse. They don't have to rehearse everything they're going to say, but at least tech check themselves and how they get on and off. Thank you, Mary. I love it when a bonus tip. We love a random one. We love it when it ties in to our larger thing. But listeners, that brings us to the end of this week's episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can also join our private Better Events community on Substack. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can also connect directly with Mary and I on LinkedIn. We love hearing from you and all of your lovely messages. As always, we thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.